Hello, it's V again from IELTS Speaking. Welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about a classic topic in the IELTS Speaking test. However, just because it's so familiar doesn't mean that we can take it for granted. Instead, we always have to be well prepared.
The topic is reading newspapers and magazines. As you know, there are hundreds of questions for this topic, so it's impossible for me to cover them all in this video, and that's why I'm not trying to do that. Instead, I want to give you a short list of the most important and common vocabulary to talk about newspapers and magazines. Let's get started. Let's start by taking a look at some confusing terms. We have the mass media, the mainstream media, the social media, and the print media. Well, notice that we say media, not mere. It's the E, long E sound, media. You can use media with a singular or a plural verb. Similarly, you can use a singular or plural verb with the press. We say the local press, for example, or the scandal has been reported in the press. The scandal has been published in the media. In addition, I think the two terms free speech and free press are also essential when it comes to the topic of newspapers and magazines. For example, you can say in developed countries, free speech and free press are highly respected. Next are some useful verbs to talk about the fact that information or news is put in newspapers and magazines. We have to break, to publish, to publicize, to distort, and to expose. Notice that we use expose with bad news. Expose something bad, like a scandal or crime. Well, one of the most common questions about reading newspapers and magazines is probably why people do that. Here are some ideas and some vocabulary notice for you. Well, instead of saying the first reason is, you can say one of the motives or a driving force is. If you need to use reasons, maybe you should add an adjective like dominant or prevalent to make your vocabulary more impressive. Another way is say out of. For example, some people read magazines out of their interest. That means because they like that, because they're interested in magazines. For the purpose of. And finally, we have for one thing, for another thing. This is a very common pair to talk about reasons. For one thing means the first reason is. For another thing means another reason is. A complete answer to this question can be something like this. Well, there are various reasons, but generally speaking, I can safely say that the most prevalent motive is to read for pleasure, I think. A lot of Vietnamese people enjoy sipping a cup of coffee and glancing through a newspaper in the morning before going to work to keep up to date with current affairs. And of course, many people read out of their job requirements as well. Question number 2 is about the types of news that people usually read. First, we have current affairs. Notice that current affairs is always in the plural form. We also have sensational news, breaking news, and finally a hot potato. To remember these phrases, A good way is to think of an example of each kind of news that I have mentioned. For example, when I tried to remember the word a hot potato, I thought about the new immigration law by Donald Trump president. It's caused a lot of argument, so it's definitely a hot potato. Alright, some more useful vocabulary. Notice that we say the sports press. Don't forget little s. Sports in this case is an adjective. The advice column is also called the Q&A or question and answer column. Alright, we have the word tabloid and broadsheet. Well, these two words can be used as an adjective or a countable noun. So you can say, I think reading tabloids is really entertaining. Reading tabloids. Another example is, well, it's necessary to read broadsheet newspapers to keep myself up to date with current affairs every day. A tabloid and a broadsheet are different in terms of size and content. Let's take a look. Can you think of any other examples of tabloids and broadsheets? Now, let's choose your favorite vocabularies and ideas to make a complete answer. This is my answer. Well, in my opinion, the answer varies from person to person because it's a matter of personal interest. From my observation, most people are into current affairs and hot potatoes, both home and abroad. Others have a preference for something more relaxing or entertaining. So they go with the music press, sports magazines, and things like that, The third question is about the differences between newspapers and magazines. Well, this doesn't look like an easy question in my opinion, so definitely some preparation is necessary. From my viewpoint, there are several differences, as you can see on the screen, but my advice is you should go with the first 2 or 3 differences because I think they're quite easy to be expressed. So your answer can be something like this. Well, I think there are some basic differences between newspapers and magazines. The most striking one is probably the fact that newspapers are published more regularly, frequently than magazines. For example, as far as I know, most newspapers are published on a daily basis, while magazines usually come out periodically, say once a month or once every 2 weeks. In addition to that, as you can easily see, newspapers usually focus on something quite important like current affairs or breaking news, while magazines have a more specific focus of content. For example, there are magazines that put the emphasis on music, other magazines concentrate on sport. Last but not least, most newspapers seem to be broadsheets. They are printed in a larger size than magazines. If you're asked to make a comparison between the print media and the online versions of the press, I think here are some very useful ideas for you. From my viewpoint, a huge plus of the print media is that it engages sensory elements. I know that this may sound a little bit weird, but the truth is, some people are really keen to listen to the sound of the pages turning or sense the smell of paper. As for the online versions of the press, I think the biggest plus or the most striking advantage is that it's free as long as people have a mobile device and internet access. And also, it's really convenient. So you can read online newspapers and magazines at your convenience. At your convenience means whenever and wherever you like. Let's take a look at this question. Will online newspapers replace print newspapers? You can say yes or no to this question. That's up to you as long as you have enough arguments and reasons or examples. Remember that there are no right or wrong answers in the IELTS speaking test. It's all about your opinions and viewpoints. I will answer this question in two different ways to show you examples. First, I will say yes. So I will begin by stating my opinion very clearly, but I'm not going to say, yeah, online newspapers will replace print newspapers. I'm not going to repeat the question because that's not going to give me any score. So the first thing I will try to do is to rephrase some keywords or rephrase the question. And then I will continue by giving reasons for my opinion. Finally, if I have time, this is optional, if I have time, I will make a conclusion. I mean, restating my opinion in a different way. So here's my answer. Well, honestly, I'm not very optimistic about the future of the print press. For one thing, as you can see, the internet will be a lot more easily accessible and therefore more and more popular, even with the senior citizens. So I think that they will change the reading habits from traditional newspapers and magazines to the online version. For another thing, it doesn't make any sense for us to pay for something that we can easily access free of charge. I mean, nowadays you can read online newspapers without having to pay for them, as long as you have a mobile device and the internet access. For those reasons, I'm convinced that online newspapers will make print newspapers obsolete. Obsolete is a high-scoring word, so if possible, you should try to use it. Obsolete. With the same structure, introduction, reasons, and conclusion, I'm gonna answer this question in another way. This time, I will say no. My answer is something like this. Well, despite the increasing popularity of the online versions, I'm of the opinion that the print media will survive. Let me explain. As you can see, there are certain advantages of the print media. For example, I know that a lot of people have the habit or even a hobby of keeping a collection of their favorite newspapers and magazines, and they consider them as their personal belongings. So in this case, newspapers and magazines are not only of practical value but also of sentimental value to some people. More importantly, reading paper newspapers or print newspapers is like a long-standing habit of many people in my country, especially senior citizens. So I think that this habit is not gonna be changed, not at least in the near future. So that's why I'm convinced that the print media is not gonna be superseded no matter what. Supersede is another high-scoring word that I highly recommend. Supersede. Well, that's all. Thank you for watching. If you want more lessons, make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on my fan page. See you in the next lesson.